Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the dangerous developments coming from the following Israeli breaches, repeated Israeli breaches on Lebanon after the ceasefire took place. And now we are at a stage where Hizbullah decided they are no longer going to contain it, and therefore they started their first response after the Israeli breaches. We're also going to be talking about the updates from the ground in Gaza. We've heard reports about the Palestinian resistance launching missiles on Israel from Gaza again. And now we have more developments coming in from Syria. We have the Iranian foreign minister. He visited Turkey. All of a sudden, we're listening to a change in tone from the Turkish officials, alongside threats coming from Israel against Syria. But we're going to start off with the main thing. Hezbollah, they told Israel, and if you return, we will return. And today they have returned. We've had a week of repeated breaches coming from Israel against Lebanon, day after day, immediately after the implementation of the ceasefire. Why is that? Do you know why that is? It's because Israel had a side agreement with the United States, like someone's getting married and publicly having a side, woman. That's what Israel did with the United States. And what did that side agreement allow Israel to do? Well, it allowed them to, hit Hezbollah if they see a threat and attack them, basically, without clear definitions as to the threats, the level of threats. One of these clauses in their side agreement with the United States says that the Israeli side should speak to the committee in charge of implementation when it comes to the ceasefire, and only if they are unable to act, then Israel would act. But then it also allows Israel to act if it sees there's any threat to launch something from Lebanon, or if there's a threat that, what Israel sees a threat. Israel sees ants as a threat. Israel sees air as a threat. Everything's a threat to them. So that allowed them, that enabled them to do that. Yet, despite that, Amos Hochstein is complaining. He said, Israel, you're breaching the ceasefire. Well, what do you expect? Well, you allowed them to, publicly. And then the French also criticized Israel. However, there's so much that the other side can handle. And we've had 3 martyrs in Lebanon the past week, following the reckless mass terror attacks of Israel and breaches in Lebanon. Well, not mass, but they had attacks in Lebanon that killed people. And they had attacks in breaches in Beirut. Those breaches were in the form of invading the Lebanese airspace. And they had attacks in the south. So now Hezbollah said, that's it. It's not like it's a one-side agreement here. If you want to violate, we will violate. And they had this report today. The Israeli enemy has repeatedly violated the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon without any respect for all the American mediation attempts and the efforts made to get the enemy out of its predicament after the failure of its ground aggression on southern Lebanon, with the painful blows it received from the Islamic resistance along the border area and the Zionist settlements in northern occupied Palestine, reaching deep into the usurping entity and to Haifa and beyond, even to Tel Aviv. And they have had a missile on a location that Israel calls Har Dov, with several missiles. And they landed. And now we have talks in Israel about response. As a matter of fact, we are having more talks that the responses will be increasing. And the Lebanese parliament speaker, Nabih Berri, who led the mediation, he also confirmed that the aggressive actions carried out by the Israeli occupation forces in terms of bulldozing homes in the Lebanese villages bordering occupied Palestine, in addition to continued air raids and the implementation of raids that target more than once the depths of Lebanese areas, during which martyrs and wounded fell, all these actions represent a flagrant violation of the terms of the ceasefire. Clearly, the ceasefire was on the 27th. Today is the 2nd of December. The agreement was signed on the 27th of November. Every single day, Israel had breaches. They had breaches against Lebanon, and today Hezbollah started to respond. Is this the end of the ceasefire? It could be, because the behavior of Israel from the beginning showed that it's not really interested in a ceasefire, just a bit of a one-sided ceasefire, so that they can continue their aggression against Lebanon, rearm, regroup, and get more weapons, and do whatever they want without any repercussions. And as a matter of fact, we've had reports that Israel started to, because this is a developing thing, by the way, they actually started to conduct attacks against Lebanon following the response coming from Hezbollah against these Israeli breaches. So we had a report in one of the Israeli newspapers saying, in response to the shooting on Mount Dov, the IDF bombed 20 Hezbollah launchers. There you go, 20. And that's just literally now, 15 minutes ago. This was just updated ever since I copied the link, by the way. So meaning now you have 20 Israeli attacks on Lebanon confirmed by Israel after Hezbollah responded to the continued Israeli breaches. And the IDF continues to attack in South Lebanon. So it doesn't look like we have any sort of ceasefire anymore. This is clearly the beginning of the end when it comes to this very fragile ceasefire. And this end is coming primarily because of the continued aggressions and continued violations of the terrorist state against Lebanon after they actually signed a ceasefire agreement. So we are expected to see more escalation. I would not be surprised if within the next hours we will have more attacks coming back and forth, even from Hezbollah. And I don't think it will be too long before Hezbollah again start targeting the areas that they were already targeting towards the end of the ceasefire, because their targeting of Har Dov in the beginning, they said that they targeted this area near the borders. That was just a sign. So this is what Hezbollah usually do. They'll say, okay, we'll give you a sign that we won't just sit there, right, and not do anything. We will respond to your aggression, to see what type of response they will get from Israel. This is the response that they got from Israel. What? 20 attacks against what Israel claims to be missile launchers. And Israel can claim anything to be a missile launcher. Anything to Israel can be interpreted as a missile launcher or as whatever it is. You know them. They're hyper-pathological liars who lie more than they breathe. So we're looking at the end of the ceasefire, and it won't be too long, in my opinion, up until everything goes full-blown again when it comes to Hezbollah in Israel. And that is primarily due to the Genostate breaching these agreements and the backing of the United States administration that is fueling this conflict and fueling other conflicts across the world. That's the first thing, and I will continue to inform you with anything that comes in on that front. Then, Gaza. Gaza is targeting Israel. Here they're saying they're issuing a warning to some of the residents in Gaza, as if that makes any difference. You know, they kill people in tents. What do you mean warning them? As if they care. But they're saying Israel is confirming that a missile was launched from Khan Yunis. A missile being launched from Gaza, guys, is not a missile being launched from Lebanon. A missile being launched from Gaza against Israel is something extremely significant, because you're talking about massive Israeli presence, massive destruction, bulldozing, bombing everything. Yet the Palestinian resistance is still able not only to conduct resistance actions against the genocide forces inside of the Gazan territories, where Israel is committing a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing and barbarism, but they're also able to hit inside of Israel. Now, mind you, the attacks of the Palestinian resistance when it comes to missiles is not very significant when it comes to Israel, but it does bother Israel. It bothers Israel because they still have that capability, and it bothers Israel because it still gives that sense of lack of safety for the settlers in the area surrounding Gaza. And Israel is trying very hard to prepare everything so that people can go back, and not only go back, well, they're planning, they're inviting settlers. Israel is inviting settlers to Gaza. Did you know that? So before, we only had talks about, you know, some of these settler movements talking about, you know, we want to settle in Gaza and we need to build, and we want a sea view over the bodies of the Palestinian children and innocent people killed. But now what? Now the IDF, who are trying to hide, always trying to hide their crimes and spew venom and propaganda, they're confirming that they are inviting these depraved squatters to Gaza. Why are they inviting them? It's because they're side by side with them. They're hand in hand. There is no difference between the IDF and the most radical of radicals inside of this genocide state. They're all the same. So we've had this report as well, again, confirming. Satellite images revealed, firstly, the IDF built large bases in the center of the Gaza Strip and destroyed hundreds of buildings. That's not new, probably new to some of the ignorant Israeli population being brainwashed by this poison here. But this is, look at this, clear, massive bases. And we spoke about them establishing in the Netzarim line. But what's more interesting is this right here. Look at those. This is Daniela Weiss, the squatting witch, the main squatting witch that always calls for settlements in Gaza. And these are some of the grand thieves of lands in the West Bank. They're trying to steal now lands in Gaza. And this is a genocide officer. This here is a genocide officer showing them around in Gaza. You know, we still have the bodies of people in the streets, and they're inviting the squatting masters to Gaza to show them, look, we killed so many people for you. Now it's time for you to come and build your homes on top of them. Mind you, you might find a body under your house at one point, but I hope that doesn't bother you. And of course, they wouldn't mind, you know, it's fine, no problem from their perspective. They've already done that in other locations too. So anyone trying to differentiate between the Israel as a state, the Israeli army, the squatters, you're delusional. They're all the same. They work hand in hand, and they only try and fool people and fool you. As a matter of fact, the ex-IDF chief is now saying that IDF is implementing an ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. Where are all of the propagandists sitting there denying and questioning genocide from their sofas? Where are you? Bogi Ya'alon, Moshe Ya'alon, he is confirming that Israel is implementing a campaign of ethnic cleansing inside of Gaza. What how many more people from Israel do you need? This is the ex-IDF chief. The ex-IDF chief saying that we are having a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And Netanyahu's ex-defense chief, he was under Netanyahu. Netanyahu's ex-defense chief, Ya'alon, warns Israel on path of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But during his statement, he also said, well, we're already implementing an ethnic campaign in the north, an ethnic cleansing campaign in the north. What's happening in the north clearly shows that. We're forcibly forcing people out. Look at what's happening in Jabalia. What more do you want than that? Former Defense Minister and ex-IDF Chief Staff Moshe Ya'alon said on Saturday that Israel's leadership, driven by far-right elements who seek to resettle in Gaza, was taking the country down the path of ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip, and specified that the IDF was already cleansing, here you go, parts of Gaza of Arabs, no Palestinians, Arabs. While warning that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government was leading the nation to destruction. The path we are being dragged down is one of occupation, annexation, and ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip, the prominent government critic told the Democrat TV. Transfer, call it what you want, and Jewish settlements. Who is that? Ya'alon, the ex-IDF chief. Is any propagandist listening? If any propagandist is listening, then I would like you to post that next time you speak. That the ex-IDF chief saying there's ethnic cleansing in Gaza. For the deniers, right? So more and more people are speaking up, even from the military establishment, against this campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing that is happening in Gaza. It's undeniable. And the state, it's not stopping like in Gaza or anything. The state is on a mission of complete implementation of fascism. Fascism, I mean, worse than Nazism. The worst dystopian state you can ever imagine. That's what's happening in Israel. How? Now the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is saying that we need to ban the call for prayer. He needs to ban the call for prayer inside of occupied territories. He instructs the police, prevent mosques from using loudspeakers to broadcast a call to prayer. The call of the prayer was in Palestine ever since there were Muslims in Palestine for over 1,400 years. When there were still Jews in some points, in some locations, and Christians, of course, in Palestine. But now, 1,400 years later, this foreigner wants to come and dictate how Muslims call for prayer in their own land. In their own land. That's inside of the Palestinian occupied territories. That's inside of Israeli territories. Inside of the heart of the genocide. Full-blown fascism, dystopia, Orwellian state. That's what they're doing. And they're still being supported by countries that call themselves enlightened democracies. That's the first part in relation to Gaza, Lebanon, Palestine, and the genocide. And they're also linked with what's happening in Syria. So for the past couple of days, we've been talking about the developments in Syria with armed groups storming into locations that are very important when it comes to Syria. And now we have a call, or really an attempt coming from Iran primarily to try and de-escalate. And this de-escalation attempt started from Syria. Yesterday, Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, he was in Syria. He was talking with the Syrian leadership about what's happening in Aleppo. And in other parts too, now some of the armed opposition are marching through Hama as well. And clearly we're looking at a big campaign here. And now he is in Turkey. And now Turkey is calling for de-escalation. Several days back, Turkey was saying, oh no, this is just a limited campaign. They were showing more of an understanding when it comes to this operation coming from the armed opposition groups. Because in Syria, you have opposition groups that are not armed. And not all of the opposition is united. That's for, because, you know, some people like to label the whole side as something and the other side something. That's not true. Coming from people who support the government, from people who oppose the government. Some people in the opposition did not choose the violent path, by the way, and some of them do not necessarily agree with all of the actions being taken by these armed groups. But these armed groups are there, and they are present heavily, and they are backed. And Turkey was showing an understanding to these armed groups when it comes to this operation, saying it's a limited operation, and it's a response. It's a response to the attacks that are being conducted jointly by the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force, or what is labeled as the Syrian-Russian Air Force in Syria. But now it seems like the tone has changed after Abbas Araghchi visited Turkey. Now, mind you, Russia already told them, you're breaching the agreements that we had with you, with the Syrians, and with other countries too. But Araghchi probably told them something. And I'll get to what he might have told them in a sec. But we had this report in Daily Sabah in Turkey saying the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan discussed anti-regime groups' offensive in Syria and the Palestine-Israel conflict in a meeting in the capital Ankara on Monday with his Iranian counterpart Araghchi. And they had a news conference where they repeatedly warned all parties of the conflict, meaning the pro-government and the anti-government, to avoid escalation of tensions. He noted that the problems have not been resolved for the past 13 years since the start of the unrest in Syria, which led to the current situation. And he also added that it would be false to explain away the developments due to foreign intervention, although most of the support is coming from Turkey. He underlined that Turkey always supported the territorial integrity in Syria as well. And then they added that Turkey and Iran are seeing eye to eye when it comes to cooperation against terrorism. And Ankara would not allow terrorist groups to exploit instability in Syria. Fidan stated that they had measures in place against possible problems that may affect Turkey. And of course, yesterday, Araghchi was in Damascus where he met Bashar al-Assad. And he told him, Tehran supports you firmly. And after this attack that is coming from the armed Syrian opposition. So what's the reason for this change when it comes to Turkey? We could have potentially had, a bit of a warning coming from Iran. About what? Well, Iran can use leverage against Turkey when it comes to some of the Kurdish movements in Syria. We already saw coordination between the Syrian government and the Kurdish movements that went to Aleppo. And Iran can have similar intervention. But the intervention that can come from Iran with the Kurdish movements, although Iran doesn't want that, by the way, because Iran already has problems with the Kurdish movements themselves, they can cause much more headache to Turkey. They can cause much more headache to Turkey internally, not just inside of Syria, with the areas that some of the armed opposition groups are controlling. They can give them drones. Not the most advanced or whatever, but they can give them drones. If the Kurdish movements obtain drones from Iran, then we would have something much more powerful inside of Russian territories. That's something very important. And this comes simultaneously with a recent report coming from Reuters, actually, alongside some sources in Syria confirmed that as well, based on some journalists, saying that the UAE and the United States discussed lifting Assad sanctions in exchange for break with Iran. So it is about something, and that warning came before, if I'm not mistaken. Let's read through it. The US and the United Arab Emirates discussed with each other the possibility of lifting sanctions on Bashar al-Assad if he peels away himself away from Iran, cuts off weapons route to Lebanon's Hizbullah. So they're tied. The operation and this offer, right? Carrot and stick. 5 people familiar with the matter said, the conversations intensified in recent months, the sources said, driven by the possible expiry on December 20th, sweeping US sanctions on Syria, and by Israel's campaign against Tehran's regional network, including Hizbullah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Iranian assets in Syria. Look at all of that. Firstly, the terrorist administration in the United States is illegally imposing sanctions on Syria, like it does very arrogantly against other countries too. And now they're saying, you don't want us to extend this embargo, sanctions, distance yourself from Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. Who does that serve? Why is the United States doing this? For the sake of Israel, right? Who does it serve? The discussions took place before anti-Assad rebels swept into Aleppo last week in their biggest offensive in Syria for years. So we warned you. You refused. Clearly, the Assad government refused to submit. And then they told them, well, here you go, a new campaign. You can deal with that now. According to the sources, the new rebel advance is a signal of precisely the sort of weakness Assad's alliance with Iran and that the Emirati and US initiative aims to exploit. But if Assad embraces Iranian help for counteroffensive, that could also complicate efforts to drive a wedge between them, the sources said. Typical US administration behavior. They act like a massive cartel, a massive mafia, mass terror, going threatening countries. If you don't listen to us and do what we want you to do, then you will face sanctions. We will choke you and your population. Because sanctions, they're not just against the regime, right? What they call the regime. Sanctions are against the whole state. Everyone suffers from sanctions. Let that be very clear. Some people don't understand that. They'll tell you sanctions against the country. These sanctions are against all of the people of Syria. And some of these people oppose the government. So don't act like you care about the people of Syria. But clearly the Syrian government is not going to submit to the United States. They already have the support. Some people in Syria back them. Some people oppose them. You have Russia backing them, Iran backing them too. So it's not like they are in a weak position. They were in a much weaker position before the Russian intervention. Yet, even with that, they did not submit to the United States demands, because this was not the first time that the United States proposes this to the Syrian government. They proposed that to the government in Syria when the armed opposition was taking away massive territories, and they were close to Damascus too. But they did not agree. This needs to be clear. They did not agree. If they had agreed, then the situation would have been different. And the beginning of the operation following this proposal from the US clearly shows who's behind this operation and for the sake of who this operation is being implemented. Because like I said, when you talk about sanctions against Syria, well, they are affecting the people who you claim to be supporting. It's not as if not everyone in Syria is pro-government, are they? So you're affecting them too. But of course, they have armed groups that do as they're told. And because they do as they're told, they began this campaign several days back because the government in Syria rejected the proposals coming from the US and, according to the report, the UAE, to cut ties with Iran, Hizbullah, and Hamas. But the funny thing is, by the way, the UAE, after they started to have these attacks from the armed groups, they showed solidarity with the government, indicating that the UAE might have been outside of the picture when it comes to the armed groups operation, the deterrence of aggression. They were clearly outside of the picture. Those who were in the picture, of course, was the American administration and Israel. And that's happening when? That's happening with warnings coming from Israel, the main party benefiting from what's happening. What are they saying? They're saying the IDF is warning Tehran in the shadow of the rebel attack in Syria. We will prevent Iranian weapons from reaching. And this warning stretched to Syria. IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Daniel Hagari, if you don't know Hagari, here he is, the calendar man. The calendar man, you remember him. IDF spokesperson Hagari was interviewed this afternoon by Sky News and issued a warning to Iran against the background of developments in Syria. The Iranian regime is sending reinforcements to Syria. We are monitoring the situation there and confirm that Israel will act according to the appropriate position. Iranian weapons are prevented from reaching Syria. By who? By you? Who do you think you are? Plus, why are you worried about Iran sending reinforcements and you're not worried about this armed opposition controlling areas of Syria? What does that tell you? And the fact that we're having this operation after the warning that came from the United States alongside the UAE to offer the Syrian government to stop supporting them and we might lift the sanctions. And now we have Israel also threatening as well. And these were the main things that I want to talk to you about in this live stream. Now I'll open the space up for you. Check if you have any questions or comments. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for another show. Studio Rainer, Rockhound, and Glenn Hawksley, thank you. So Studio said, Iran not attacking is a sign of strength. If Israel has to submit to Hezbollah, what the hell can they do to Iran? Even with the US airships. Yeah, you're right about that. But before you talk about Hezbollah, if Israel has to submit to Hamas, to Gaza, not just Hezbollah, Israel isn't able to defeat the resistance in Gaza. And now they're talking about potential of having a ceasefire in Gaza. Although all of it can just be talk. But, you know, whenever there's talk and there are developments, we, of course, will cover them and speak about them. But if they're not able to do that, and if no one is intimidated by the United States and Israel, who's intimidated by them? Israel is the punching bag now in West Asia. And the US aircraft carriers, they were expelled. Ansarullah forced them out with repeated blows. And then the US claimed they were going back to maintenance in Virginia and in, right? What was it, San Diego or something? So, yeah, no one is intimidated by them. And then you said, I'll bet $100 that Britain will switch. No, if you want to bet 100, you need to bet 100 pounds, not dollars. That Britain will switch to Iran's side, which will include the Anglosphere. Keep an eye on the British. They appease Germany too. Interesting. I mean, so far, the British establishment because the British establishment doesn't really represent, all of the British population, but, there are people who they represent. But the British establishment has been traditionally with Israel. The British establishment gave them the Balfour Declaration. The British establishment still does a lot of dirty work. They still cooperate with a country committing genocide. They still meet with war criminals, and they still legitimize this war criminal entity. And when it comes to Germany, we know very well the British ties with Nazi Germany and the Nazi salutes and the support of the Nazi bureaucracy of West Germany following the collapse of the Third Reich. That's all known. But things are developing. That's the thing. And it doesn't have to be about taking sides here. The only thing that it's about now is not imposing your agenda on other nations through terror. Imposing your political will or financial will on other nations by sanctions and by going to war with them, you're talking about terror. That's mass terror. And that's what the United States and its little proxies in Europe, including the NATO and Israel, are doing for their financial gain. And Angela as well. Thank you so much, Angela Brody. And let's go check if you have anything else. Tam is saying, Mahmoud, what do you think if this insurgents fails? What do you think their next move will be? I am not convinced that this insurgency is disconnected from foreign intervention. And again, with regards to the Syrian opposition, there is legitimate Syrian opposition to the Syrian governments based on facts, okay? But there is Syrian opposition to the government that is being managed by foreign forces who don't have any sort of goodwill for Syria as a state and for the Syrian people. And this campaign came at a time where there were more and more efforts for reconciliation and a peace process in Syria that could potentially include certain important reforms when it comes to the government and how things are run. Because initially, when you spoke about the protests that began taking place, you were talking about a reform, democracy, and human rights, whatever. The government made mistakes. They had certain crackdowns, but things were very cloudy. And there was a massive armed move immediately that couldn't have been taking place without foreign intervention. All of a sudden, the government in Syria, their intel internally, they know everyone who has weapons and everyone who says a word against the government. They know all of that. So all of a sudden, for you to have these armed groups, all of a sudden, that's not something without foreign intervention. And again, the Syrian opposition, it's not like all of them can be put in one basket, right? And we firmly support the Syrian people in the right to freedom and human rights and everything. But what we don't support is foreign-led intervention inside of Syria, even if it might take different shapes and different robes, for the sake of primarily Israel, by the way, primarily. And if it fails, well, you can have multiple things. If it fails, The worst thing that can happen now is a continued war in Syria. That would be extremely bad, because you would have both parties engaged in this infighting, and who would that serve? If they are facing or will face more pressure to retreat or to continue with the reconciliation process, then things might calm down, because more efforts can be taken by the countries that are involved in Syria, such as Iran, Russia, the US, Turkey, and other countries too, to hasten the solution, to make it quicker to reach a solution inside of Syria. Marcin, Mahmoud Habib, even the tunnels in Gaza remain secret and secure. What they're talking is out of fear and confusion. Yes, they are still secure. And Israel, after 14 months, they haven't been able to touch the tunnel system of the Palestinian resistance, despite American help, despite British help, despite all of the barbarism that you can think of. Because the Palestinian resistance had a network also of dummy tunnels, booby trap tunnels. That's where most of these were the majority of the tunnels that were found by the genocide troops inside of Gaza, and many of them were killed inside them. TMZBG, how do you think this will affect Iran's retaliation? I think Iran will look to solve this problem in diplomatic ways. They will speak with the countries who they are certain have leverage on these movements. And they will, of course, if this continues, they will have their own reinforcements, by the way. They're going to have to confront them. But they will try and exhaust everything diplomatically. First, try and see if that can be agreed upon. If not, there will be a campaign against them. There will be a military campaign, and more lives will be lost on both sides, supporting and against the government. And we hope it doesn't escalate. We hope both sides are able to sit together and talk things through, and finally have a genuine peace process in Syria that would be accompanied by a genuine reform in Syria and more equal human rights all across of Syria. And that was from TMZBGD. Thank you so much for that. And Marvin is saying, if this is a good time for Iran to strike, it could be. It could be. Well, on Israel, this could be a good time for them. I think they have multiple scenarios that they are preparing. Some of these scenarios could happen in the shorter term, some of these in the longer term. We spoke about yesterday the fact that they are waiting to see if a ceasefire can be achieved in Gaza after, well, there was a temporary success with the ceasefire that now clearly ended in Lebanon. That's looking to get worse now. Things will probably escalate very shortly. And from their perspective, well, okay, clearly you're ruining the ceasefire that we thought might do something. And again, I'm assuming what Iran's or the Iranian establishment's line of thinking might be. And therefore, this would be the perfect time to hit the genocide entity. Violet is saying, can you talk about the fatwa against Hamas by Turkish-backed resistance? Some of the Turkish-backed or armed movements against the Assad government, they have indeed threatened the Palestinian resistance. Some of them were seen stepping on the Palestinian flag and tearing pictures down of Yahya Sinwar. However, also to be objective, that also doesn't necessarily represent all of the Syrian opposition. But these people are in the forefronts. That's the worrying thing. The worrying thing is that people like that and their backers are there, present, and in the front lines too. And all of these things are worrying. Because listen, we also had people from the armed Syrian opposition reassuring the Syrian population, now, no, we're not here to, this is for everyone in Syria and we're not there to harm anyone. And even those who were supporting the Assad government, if you just take away your arms, right, and not fight us, that's fine, you'll be safe. It doesn't matter who you are, what kind of religious background you are, whatever it is. But on the other side, we're hearing other reports from people inside of like places like Aleppo and other locations talking about things that are contradicting to these reassurances coming from other parts. Why is that happening? That's happening because the Syrian opposition is not a united front against the government. No, they are split. Different ideologies, different motives, sometimes different funding, and different approaches. And that's something problematic. Because then you can't say, that's why I refuse to label all of the Syrian opposition as one thing. Because you can't say that all of them are one. No, not all of them are one. It wouldn't be true to say that. But there are things that are happening on the ground that raise suspicions, that's to say the least, especially with the whole campaign now as it's happening. It's not coming out of nowhere. And of course, they will have these religious scholars issuing these fatwas. Religious scholars very busy with Arab and Muslim countries, and when you talk about the genocide entity, they go to sleep. Okay. And Cookie Dough, thank you so much. Mystic Mother saying, any news about Netanyahu's court case? Has it started yet? Well, it's not like there would be a court case if you won't have an arrest. The first part in this is having the arrest. So the arrest warrant has been issued, and the ICC asked all the signatories to enforce the arrest warrant. And they also asked non-signatory countries to participate and comply. So there will be no court unless you're talking about an arrest. So he would need to be arrested, moved to the detention center in The Hague, and then the court case would start. And sometimes in very rare cases, they can have a trial without his presence. That's something that can happen. It would be very interesting if that does indeed happen. But then again, if it lacks enforcement, then, we're not going to see anything. And if you cannot enforce the arrest warrant itself, how are you going to enforce any other court judgment? That would be the argument. And that's why not many cases are brought before the court without the person's presence. And so far, there have been countries that said that, we're willing to comply. Others no, and they were criticizing the ICC, saying you don't have jurisdiction, what have you. But Netanyahu is working really hard, by the way, and with his legal teams to find a way out, and Israel's trying to challenge it. Faria, hi Mahmoud, I'm wondering why the Israeli squatters think they will succeed. They haven't been able to defeat Hamas, Hezb, they can suddenly fight Iran and Russia. Well, because when it's like they're drunk. These people inside of Israel, the squatting establishment, they're drunk. It's as if you're talking with someone totally intoxicated with racism and arrogance. So imagine someone totally intoxicated, they're not thinking straight, and they have heaps of ignorance, of arrogance and racism. It's difficult to talk to them. And they become delusional and unrealistic. But the more important thing here, by the way, is that there is complicity. There is complicity coming from what? Coming from the Israeli army. And Sim Borska, thank you for that. He said, will Chinese act as Uyghurs radicals train in Syria? Well, I have seen reports of different nationals fighting in Syria. There is proof for that. There are numbers of them fighting with the Syrian opposition. They're not, of course, all of the Syrian opposition, because some of the armed Syrian opposition are still Syrian. But I don't think China would necessarily do something. But listen, their position when it comes to Syria has been clear. They have supported the government. They have taken a similar stance to Russia. But the only thing is that we are seeing more intervention from Russia rather than China. Holy, I heard Syrian government forces taking back territory. Can you comment? I haven't seen a verification for that. And I think, like since the Syrian conflict started, you would see misinformation from both sides. So there have been reports of the Syrian government taking back territories in Aleppo. That I haven't seen proof of that. I have seen that a confirmation from the Kurdish movement supporting them, but there was a footage of the Syrian armed opposition controlling Aleppo, or taking Aleppo, and also going to Hama, not central Hama. There have been videos published of them is controlling parts on the suburbs of Hama, but they haven't entered Hama. And again, we spoke about this being a potentially tactical retreat from the Syrian army, so that they can protect the red lines. They might have their red lines, and they didn't want to lose forces confronting these armed groups in the north, in Aleppo. And mind you, there weren't many of the government forces in those areas too, because, you know, life was moving and what have you. So they might have had a tactical retreat down south to potentially control Hama and Homs. Homs is more important. Homs is the step after Hama for the opposition. And when you reach Homs, you're one step away from Damascus. The M5 after that will lead you to Damascus. But what I did hear is the fact that there are reinforcements coming from Iraq. And there have been attacks from the Syrian Russian Air Force inside of Syria against the hubs of the armed opposition. Mahmoud, do you think that creating chaos in Syria is a way of the Americans to tie West Asia with Ukraine so Trump can't end the war? No, that's interesting. That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think the two conflicts started to become increasingly more tied several months into the genocide in Gaza, and there have been certain moves conducted by the Ukrainian forces and their mercenaries in Ukraine, inside of Russian territories, primarily the Kursk invasion, that coincided with Russia arming Iran heavily. And yesterday we spoke about reports confirming Iran getting parts of the Su-35 SEs. And before that, you were talking about very solid and strong air defense radars and systems. So they were already intertwined. They were already connected together. And when it comes to tying the two or entangling them further, I'm not sure that would necessarily succeed. There's still a big geographical distance between Syria and Ukraine. And Zelensky himself is already saying that I'm willing to give up territories for Russia in return for a NATO membership that he did not really disclose the timing of. And Trump reportedly said, you know, let's delay it for 20 years so that we can give time for this to be settled.
So I'm not sure if it would really succeed, but they are linked because there have been Ukrainians fighting with the Syrian opposition, and Russia is, of course, backing the Syrian government. And by the way, Ukrainian mercenaries are in other locations in Africa too, where there's a Russian presence. It's that's why there's an argument that this is a global war already. So I think Trump, if he indeed wanted to end the war in Ukraine, he can. And if he wanted to end the war in Israel, he can. But of course, with Israel, he's supported by the Zionists who support Netanyahu. Tam, Mahmoud, does Israel have an airport in Syria? No, they don't. They don't have an airport in Syria. They don't officially have a presence in Syria, by the way. Of course, they only occupy the Golan Heights. Ryan is saying, Mahmoud, we definitely have to speak about the Kurdish population. What piece of land do they deserve? Well, it's not about what they deserve and what they don't deserve. It's about understanding why there's a problem with the Kurdish population. The main problem with the Kurdish population, or not with them, but with the Kurdish cause or problem that not only Turkey has with the Kurds, but Syria, Iran, and Iraq has with the Kurds, are the Sykes-Picot agreements between the British and the French that divided all of this territory without any ounce of consideration to the population, to constantly wreak havoc and problems internally between these people. So the Kurdish population, who were autonomous in large periods, in extended periods in history, all of a sudden have been spread from Turkey to Iran to Syria but they are Kurds. They have their heritage, they have their language, they have their traditions, and that's why we still hear about these things when it comes to Kurdistan. What we need to really address firstly is deal with the human rights case in all of the Arab and Muslim countries. That's first and foremost. So Kurds, non-Kurds, everyone, they need to have equal rights and be viewed as equal, because there's internal racism against Kurds in some of these countries, right? And discrimination. And that's a problem. Secondly, well, if we do start to address the rights of the Kurdish populations in these areas, then let's review this whole Sykes-Picot drawing between the British Empire and France. How beneficial is that for the people of the region? People who share so many things in common, right? Instead, we're heading towards path of more division. What's happening in Syria? They want to divide the state further. The United States aim and the Western establishments that support the US administration too, the neo-colonial powers with Israel, is to weaken all of these countries as much as possible, and they will side with the worst of the worst to wreak havoc in these areas. And if we have all of that, you can talk about borders. You can talk about opening borders, right? I mean, because they already have an autonomy in Iraq, but they still are under the federal government of Iraq. But the Kurdish situation is something that absolutely needs to be discussed and solved. Because, none of these people deserve to be like a class B anywhere. Do you understand? And again, this division is a very problematic division. A very problematic division for the Kurdish population. And again, the United States and Israel, they will try and capitalize and act like they are with the Kurds to steer in more division and problems, when they are really, all that they're interested in is wreaking more havoc. Jack Ayub, Mahmoud, do you think that they want to destroy Syria to stop the flow of weapons from Iran to Lebanon? That's one of the things. Yes, that's one of the main things, because Hizbullah, they have the biggest arms arsenal in West Asia. Hizbullah is more armed than many countries, but also because in Syria, they find they find a country that is not necessarily willing to play on their conditions with everything on every level, right? Economically, politically, and everything. So that's one of the key things. That's one of the main things. The flow between Iran, Syria, and Hizbullah. They want to choke Hizbullah. They want to choke Lebanon. When really and truly, the fact that Hezbollah is so armed and strong prevented a bigger genocide in Lebanon, by the way. Fight back, how much aid is going into Gaza? Hardly anything. People are still starving. And Israel is committing an ethnic cleansing campaign. Every day, their sadism grows, their barbarism grows, their genocide and infanticide grows under the watch of the whole world. They claim that they're letting aid in. The Palestinian side, well, Hamas is dealing with some internal movements to secure some of this aid. They had a campaign against the criminals that the IDF used to give the aid to. So now it's kind of being more secured so that there is less probability and options to steal the aid and then resell it at extortionate prices for the poor Palestinian people in Gaza. I mean, things cost ridiculous prices. We're talking about a big bag of flour, $200. Do you understand? Ridiculous. They can't have basic essentials because they cost so much money. And who's causing that? The genocide. That's what we need to get rid of. Okay, let's take a couple of more questions from you before we wrap up. Ari Magoo, thank you so much. And Ramplans, in reference to Kurdistan, said there's a country called Kurdistan. It's an autonomy in Iraq, and it doesn't represent the whole historical Kurdish territory. And again, even when we talk about that, before the Sykes-Picot agreement, there were no borders. Listen, in the past century, we have been used to so many things that didn't exist before. There were no borders. There were no passports. People could travel freely anywhere they like, by the way. Passports, they started to be issued in the beginning of the 20th century, just after the 1920s. The Ottoman Empire, and I think it was the Kingdom of Austria, if I'm not mistaken, were some of the first two countries or like empires to start issuing travel documents. And there were no drawn lines. That's why there are still problems in Africa too. Deserts, but there is borders in the form of one line like this. That's the border. What about the tribal communities that used to always travel to one place to another? So in many cases, as if we're living in prisons, by the way, in modern day societies. Travel document, passport, checkpoints, this, that, but control. Scary levels of control, by the way. Scary levels of control compared to the period, all of the periods before the 20th century. Fatun is saying, Salam Mahmoud, Salam. Do you think USIL and Israel ISIS are using each other for their own ambitions? USIL? What do you mean? Which USIL are you talking about? If you mean ISIL, or if you can clarify that exactly. Because if you mean ISIS or the continuation of them, then there is a coordination. There is an absolute coordination with some of these movements. ISIL. Okay. Yeah, of course there's coordination. Israel treated some of these people inside of Israeli hospitals. ISIS, right? Because there's a difference between ISIS also and other armed groups fighting. Now, technically now, it's not ISIS fighting the Syrian government. What's fighting them is HTS, called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is an evolution of Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra was a continuation of Al-Qaeda. And at one point, Jabhat al-Nusra was fighting with ISIS, by the way, in Syria. But if we talk about some of these armed groups, some of them indeed have communication coordination with Israel. And they share many things. Well, Israel and ISIS, if you don't want to talk about ISIS, by the way, they are the same thing. They're the same thing, but different religious robes, right? Using religion as a front, using terror as means to achieve political goals, killing people indiscriminately, what? Raping, kidnapping, destroying heritage sites. They're the same. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. And thank you for everyone who participated. Sorry, of course, we couldn't reach all of your comments due to the time limit. Thank you to Ari Magoo, Simborska, Cookie Dough, and Angela Brody. And also thanks to Glenn Huxley and Rockhound and Studio Rainer as well. Thank you so much. And Sarah Carroll and Zach, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the membership. And thank you everyone else for participating and joining me for another live stream. I'll hopefully be with you with another video after this and a live stream tomorrow. If there's something that is significant, I might have a random live stream too. In the meantime, stay blessed everyone, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace everyone.